The views expressed on Science for the People are not necessarily the views of this station, its affiliates, sponsors, or advertisers.
I remember one time we were walking along and he said, "Oh yeah, I remember last time you were up here you had those 505s with the scuff on the back of the right leg." I had to go check my pants when I got home to see if that was even there, and he was right about it. So he was really tuned into that.
This week on Science for the People, we're exploring faces. We all have them, we see them everywhere, and we need to recognize them to get by. Today, we'll learn about the people who are super face recognizers and those on the opposite side of the spectrum. We'll also talk about how twins fare at telling the differences between their faces, and how this might relate to perception of identity. Welcome to Science for the People. I'm Jessie Yaros. Today we're talking with Dr. Brad Duchaine, Professor of Psychology in the Department of Psychological and Brain Sciences at Dartmouth College. His lab's research focuses on social perception, and in particular, how humans process information about faces. So today we'll be picking his brain about faces and some psychological conditions that affect how we see them. Dr. Duchaine, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So there's a large body of research in social psychology and neuroscience devoted exclusively to face processing and how primates and humans perceive faces. So what is it that is so special about faces that there's so much research in it and that your research career has been devoted to face recognition?
Well, I think there's at least two factors that cause so many researchers to be interested in it. First is, as all your listeners are aware of, we spend a lot of time looking at faces. So when we're interacting with other people, we're looking at their faces for the great majority of that time. And we're extracting a lot of information when we do look at the face. Of course, we use the face to tell us who somebody is, but beyond that, we also can get a feel for what their mood is, what they're attending to. We make judgments about attractiveness from faces. And so there's just an awful lot of information that we're extracting every time we look at a face. And the second reason that it's interesting to scientists is that face processing is a really nice model system to try to understand how visual recognition works and even more largely how the brain works. Because we know that there are a number of processes that appear to be specialized for faces that are, say, different than the way we recognize other sorts of objects. And those areas have been identified in both humans and also in non-human primates. So there are animal models for face processing. So it's an area where there are a lot of different ways that you can approach trying to understand how face processing works.
So you mentioned that it's a good model for learning about visual processing in general. What do we know about how we process faces, and what are the steps from the projection of an image of a face on the retina to actually recognizing a person as someone you know? Sure.
So if we were to look, of course there's the early visual processes that occur. So, there's activity in the retina, and then that gets transmitted to thalamus and then back to the early visual areas. And then information flows into face processing areas. And I call them face processing areas because these are areas that if we were to put somebody into a scanner and we looked at their response to faces and objects, we would find these areas show an especially strong response to faces. And then most of this work has gone on in non-human primates, but when you record from the neurons within these face areas, you find that these areas are composed almost entirely of cells that respond to faces and faces only. So we've got these little sort of blueberry-sized bits of cortex inside our brain, and in each hemisphere, in our occipital and temporal lobes, we've probably got about 5 or 6 of these areas, so 12 across the two hemispheres. Then there are also some face-selective areas up in the frontal lobe, although those areas might not be strictly dedicated to face processing. So we've got this network of different regions in the brain that talk to one another and build up a representation of that face that's being viewed. What we don't have a good understanding of is what are the computational steps that are involved in developing that representation. At this point, we've sort of taken the first step in knowing sort of what areas of the brain are involved, but we don't understand how the neurons actually do their work.
So, faces it is a sort of category of objects, right?
Right.
As compared to other objects that are at least somewhat omnipresent, kind of like faces. So, you see your toothbrush every day, or utensils, or cars. So, is the difference between the visual processing of commonplace objects and faces mostly these specialized areas in the brain?
Could you clarify that a little? I didn't totally follow.
So when you are processing any visual object,
yes,
and the information is sent higher up in the brain processing stream, I'm just wondering, is there a point where if it was an object, would that information, it wouldn't
be handled? Would it be handled differently?
Yeah. As opposed to how faces are handled.
Yeah. So let's say we were talking about how a body is processed. Well, bodies activate a different set of selective areas in the brain. There are body selective areas, just like there are face selective areas. There are also areas that are scene selective. So these areas appear to be especially important for our ability to represent and recognize visual scenes. And then there's just sort of the general category of objects, which we actually, even though we spend an awful lot of time looking at objects, we don't have a great sort of understanding about how they're represented, because what they're processed by is what you might think of as kind of a default system that handles categories for which we don't have special procedures for. But yeah, so the processing is definitely different for different categories of stimuli. And
so clearly we have these specialized networks for processing face stimuli. I guess which means that the human brain is maybe more susceptible to having deficits in recognition of faces and maybe other specific objects. So one condition in which face recognition is affected that you've done a fair bit of research on is prosopagnosia. Could you tell our listeners what prosopagnosia is?
Sure. So prosopagnosia is a deficit that people who have impairments in recognizing facial identity. So they might go to the daycare center to pick up their child, and if the child's changed clothes, they might not know which child is theirs. They might have a tough time recognizing their own face in a group photo, for example. Now, that's not to say that these prosopagnosics have zero ability to recognize faces, but they're much worse than other people.
So is there a spectrum of face recognition ability even within prosopagnosic people?
Yeah, and there's a spectrum beyond prosopagnosic people. So you can think about face recognition ability as, it might be normally distributed. We don't have a real good feel for what the distribution looks like, but there are people in one tail, the prosopagnosic tail, who are very bad at face recognition. And then at the other end of the distribution, there are people that we call super recognizers, who are just off the charts when it comes to recognizing facial identity. And then somewhere in between is the great majority of the population, and those differences between people within the sort of normal regions of the curve, those are reliable differences. So some people might be around 75th percentile, other people might be around the 25th percentile.
Mm-hmm. So I guess we'll really delve into these two extremes in this talk, but focusing on prosopagnosia now, what is it like, the experience? I know you personally probably don't have it, but you've interacted with a lot of people that do. And there's all these depictions online of what it would be like to have this sort of trouble recognizing faces, where faces seem blurred or everyone has the same facial features. And I'm just not sure how accurate these are.
Yeah, it's not that they're blurred. I mean, I'm not prosopagnosic, so this is secondhand, but what they tell me is they see the face there. They just have a tough time seeing differences between faces, and they have a tough time recognizing that face as one they've seen before. One thing I've likened to the experience of looking at a face for prosopagnosics is if you turn a face upside down, you can immediately sense that you're not extracting information from that upside down face in the same way you do from an upright face. It's more difficult to see what the sex of that face is. It's more difficult to know who the person is. It's more difficult to know how attractive you find that face. And yet, nevertheless, the eyes are still there, the nose is there, it's a mouth. It's clear it's a face. And so you might imagine that prosopagnosics have a similar experience when they look at an upright face. And in fact, if we look at how prosopagnosics do with face perception tasks with upright faces, they often score similarly on those tasks with upright faces that normal participants do with upside down faces.
So, do they see features in their entirety? Facial features?
That's a good question, and we don't really know the answer to that. There's some evidence, some fMRI evidence hinting that prosopagnosics don't. They sort of, you can imagine they've got sort of smaller windows that they're looking at the face through. However, we just had a paper accepted a couple months ago in which we found that the influence of the lower half of the face on the people's perception of the top half of the face was comparable for prosopagnosics and for controls. So the jury's out on whether they're not seeing the entire face sort of holistically in the same way other people do.
Could you describe this idea about holistic processing of faces and what that means and why it's common to most people?
Sure. So this was this idea had been around a long time that we process faces more holistically than other stimuli. And the idea here is that we're able to look at a face and in one glance just represent lots of different parts simultaneously. Whereas when we look at, say, an upside down face, we have to go more feature to feature, attend to this feature, attend to this feature. And we're just not able to grab the face as a whole in one quick glance. And the best evidence that upright face processing really involves something more holistic than most other stimuli comes from an effect that was first discovered 30 years ago now, by Andy Young over in England. And what Andy did was he had people trying to recognize the top halves of famous faces. So imagine a photo of Margaret Thatcher's face. You're just seeing the top half of it. It's split around the bridge of the nose. So you see the eyes and the eyebrows and the forehead. And then that top half of the face would be aligned with someone else's bottom half of the face. So it might be, the top half might be Thatcher and the bottom half might be Princess Diana. And when you put the two halves in alignment, it's really tough to see whose identity is in either one of those halves because those two halves fuse to form a new face. And we just represent that entire face as a whole, and we're not able to match it to any of the faces that we've got in memory. On the other hand, if you shift the bottom face just slightly off so that the two halves don't align anymore, it's easy to recognize whose faces those two are coming from, whose two half faces they are. Now, that might not be all that surprising, but what makes it particularly interesting is when you take the face and turn it upside down now, aligning the top and the bottom halves of the face doesn't interfere with performance. People are just as good at recognizing that upside down top half of the face when it's aligned as when it's misaligned. So it seems that fusion doesn't happen in upside down faces. And so given that we're dealing with the exact same stimulus with an upside down face, that's really nice evidence that upright faces are really processed in a qualitatively different fashion than other sorts of stimuli, including inverted faces.
So it's possible that in prosopagnosia there is some issue with this fusion, where they can. That's that
we didn't find
recently.
Yeah, we didn't find any difference.
Interesting. So I guess jury's still out.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So since when you and me walk around and we interact with people, we generally can put a face to the name, and if I'm remembering a friend, I might first remember their face, and then all those different facts about them, those associations will come to mind, like their name and how we met, all that. Do you know how, I guess, relationships are like for people when they don't have an immediate face to put to the name? Do they identify them more as voices or as, I mean, maybe you don't know, but it seems really interesting.
Yeah, so, we hear, prosopagnosics certainly have a tougher time in relationships because they have trouble with face recognition. Now, all of us rely on non-face cues to identity. So you might see somebody walking down the hall and you can recognize them even though you haven't seen their face. You're behind them. Or you might just get a glimpse of somebody's hair. You might still be able to recognize them. But faces are really our most reliable source of information. And so prosopagnosics have to rely on those other sources of information more than we do. And some of them tend to focus on particular alternative cues. So some might say, I'm going to really focus on the hair. Or a guy I wrote my dissertation on focused on people's pants and their jeans. And he was really good at recognizing people's jeans. So each time he encountered people, he'd look to their jeans to figure out who they were. And I remember one time we were walking along and he said, oh, yeah, I remember last time you were up here, you had those 505s with the scuff on the back of the right leg. I had to go check my pants when I got home to see if that was even there, and he was right about it. So he was really tuned into that.
Wow.
So they come up with alternative strategies, but it's just not as effective usually as recognizing the face.
But it is pretty, exceptional, the tiny things you can start to notice and when you need to compensate for things that you lack.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just that Bill was in trouble, though, when people changed their pants. So
Right.
It was far from a foolproof strategy.
So it seems that there really is no visual deficit. There's no memory deficit in these people, right? It's solely face related.
Well, they don't have a general memory deficit. So it's not that they're bad at, memorizing information in general. Some of them, though, might have problems just with face memory or might have problems just with visual memory. Others probably have problems that start off in perceptual problems that are dedicated to face processing. Face processing involves a number of different stages, and a problem at any one of those stages can disrupt the ability to recognize faces. And so could be face memory in some people, could be face perception in other people.
So the idea being, if you don't see the face very detailed in a way in the first place, you can't remember it very detailed, versus if you just, you can maybe process it as detailed as it is, but when you remember it, if you can't remember it, you just don't see it.
Exactly, right.
Okay, so different areas where things can go wrong. And so we don't really know whether all people with prosopagnosia have the same, behavioral manifestations of it, do they? Or maybe not behavioral, but I guess processing. Yeah,
that's right. So behaviorally, sort of the core problem is just, it's a face memory problem. Mm-hmm. And for the prosopagnosics, it often doesn't matter for where in the chain of processing that problem arises. But we have evidence that in some people we see perceptual problems. For example, Martin Eimer, who's a neuroscientist in London, he uses EEG to measure the processes that are occurring during face processing. And he can see that these processes aren't normal in an awful lot of prosopagnosics already by 170 milliseconds after a stimulus has been presented. So those are perceptual processes at those points that are not working normally. Some, though, have normal processes or appear to have normal processes around 170 milliseconds. So you might think their problems are first appearing later on in the process.
So again, there is a lot of variability in face recognition.
Yes.
So, we've talked about the specialized machinery we have for processing faces and how I guess that can sometimes go wrong. But there are other cases of it going super, super right. With enhancements in face recognition. And you mentioned that earlier, the other extreme of face recognition, super recognizers. And I know you were one of the authors on the 2009 paper that first coined the term super recognizers. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
So what could you tell us more about what a super recognizer is?
Yeah, so, they are sort of what they sound like. These people are just fantastic when it comes to recognizing facial identity. They're the sort of people, they'll have stories, they say, I was at a train station in a town I wasn't familiar with, and I saw somebody, and I said, I went to second grade with that guy, and I haven't seen him since then, and they go up and they confirm it. Or they watch TV, and they're frequently recognizing extras from other shows that they've seen. And so they're they're frequently identifying people that just the rest of us wouldn't have a chance with. There was a Fox show called Superhuman, this game show where people who have amazing perceptual and cognitive abilities came on. One of the supers that we work with was on that show, and Luke looked at, let's say, 120 people in the audience. He was able to sort of glance at each person, and then he turned around, and 3 of the people in the audience were taken out and replaced by 3 other people. And then everybody in the audience changed their seat. And then Luke turned back around and had to find the 3 people out of this group of 100-some people who were new. He named all 3 and didn't make any false alarms, so he just nailed it. So they're really fantastic when it comes to faces.
It's crazy. And
yes.
it's like, I mean, it's like a snapshot, but of faces. I don't know if, I know that memory is not like that, but it seems like photographic almost.
There is certainly they have to have really strong visual memories. I was emailing with the guy who was on the game show just the other day, and he said to me, it's not just a visual thing that I'm getting from people. I feel like when I look at them, I'm really feeling their identity. So I'm feeling sort of how confident this person is, how trustworthy this person is, how dominant this person is. They're really sort of getting to read on their personality. And he says that information really helps me the next time I see them sort of know who that person is. So there's a lot going on. I don't think it's just visual.
Right. It seems like maybe they're picking up on subtle emotional cues that most of us are blind to.
Yes. Yes.
Either that or just attributing emotional things that help them with memory, whether or not they actually are true or not.
That's a good point. They might not have much insight into how they're actually doing it. I mean, most of us don't know how we recognize faces after all.
Right.
We just do it.
So you had mentioned that there may be some evidence that they have better visual processing or visual memory in general. So, I mean, could it be that they're actually seeing minute details more than others might, or do you think they're maybe just paying more attention to faces?
Yeah, my guess is that the supers are super because they're good at every step of the way. And so I think that their perception is superior to other people's, their memory processes are superior to others, and maybe, as I suggested, they're encoding more information than others are beyond just the visual appearance of the face. So I think there's a lot of things that make them so excellent.
Mm-hmm. And do they seem to use any different strategies? We've talked about like holistic processing strategies and how prosopagnosia, people with that lack these strategies, but do they seem to use different strategies, or is it all automatic really?
Yeah, if by strategies you mean conscious strategies, deliberate techniques that they're using, I don't think so. I think it just comes naturally to them. They don't talk about, an aha moment when they figured out how to recognize faces extremely well.
Mm-hmm. So let's really delve into, I guess, what's going on in the brains of people with both prosopagnosia and super recognition skills. We've talked about those, at least, more than 5 to, over 10 potential face patches and processing areas in the brain. Do we know what areas are specifically affected in both conditions?
So when it comes to acquired prosopagnosia, there's one view out there that suggests that, not acquired prosopagnosia, developmental prosopagnosia. So people
From
who
birth.
never suffered any brain damage, yet they're very bad with face recognition.
Mm-hmm.
There's one view out there that suggests that the face areas further back in the brain, the posterior face areas, are functioning normally, and there are poor connections to the more anterior areas of the brain. And then those anterior areas don't function normally because they're not getting the input that they should be getting from posterior areas. That's one view. My lab, though, has data now suggesting that areas throughout the face network are not responding normally in developmental prosopagnosia. So we see posterior areas not functioning. We can look at all. What we do is we look at 6 areas in each hemisphere. We do this in both the left and the right hemisphere, so we're looking at a total of 12 face-selective areas. When we look in the right hemisphere, and the right hemisphere is especially important for face processing, we see that all 6 of those areas show reduced face selectivity. And what I mean by that is if we compare the response to faces and objects in these areas, we see that the response to faces is weaker in the prosopagnosics than it is in the controls. The response to objects is about the same. And so these areas aren't as face selective in the prosopagnosics. If we run statistical tests on these differences, we find that in 4 out of the 6 areas in the right hemisphere, they're significantly weaker in the prosopagnosics. So, and that we don't see that the anterior areas are more likely to be reduced in face selectivity than the posterior areas. If we look in the left hemisphere again, the prosopagnosics again all show weaker responses in the areas. Only one of them was statistically significant, but if you look across all of them, you can see the trend's always there. So we think that if you look across the face prostate network, there's weakness in all these different areas in prosopagnosics. We can also see other problems in prosopagnosics, so we can see structural differences using MRI. And doing that, you can see that there's reduced gray matter in a number of right temporal areas, the same areas that correspond to these areas that we're looking at functionally. And we can also see some decrease in some of the white matter tracts that carry face information around.
Can you explain what gray and white matter are?
Sure. So gray matter is where the cells that are actually doing the computations are, whereas white matter are these fiber bundles that carry information from one group of cells to another group of cells. And using something called diffusion tensor imaging, people are able to measure some of the larger axon tracts, these white matter bundles that connect different regions of the brain to each other.
Okay, so these specialized areas just have more cells potentially, or more active cells, and stronger connections in
normal brains. Yeah, okay. Exactly. So basically everything that we can measure fairly well, we're seeing abnormalities. So we see abnormalities in the functional response with fMRI. We see structural abnormalities. And if we use EEG, we can also see that there are abnormalities in the way prosopagnosics respond to faces compared to normals. Now that you ask about supers, we know nothing about the neural basis of super recognition. Mm-hmm. And that's something we've got a study right now going where we're bringing super recognizers to MIT and we're doing functional and structural scanning with them to try to address these same questions that we have addressed already with the developmental prosopagnosics. My guess is they're going to be the opposite end of the spectrum when compared to the prosopagnosics. So they'll probably show greater face selectivity. They might show thicker white matter bundles, but we'll have to see.
Yeah, that gets at another question I had, because they really are, prosopagnosia and super recognizers are portrayed as the opposite. And behaviorally that makes sense, but I didn't know if there was anything neurologically to underscore that.
Yeah, there's nothing known at this point. Yeah, I mean, we've got data from 4 people and we do see what appears to be enhanced face selectivity in them, but it's a small sample at this point.
Mm-hmm. Since, I guess your guys' coining of the term super recognition and really bringing these people out of the shadows and into the public, it's gotten a lot of media attention. And, in 2015, the police force in Greater London started a whole official team of super recognizers devoted to reviewing surveillance footage. So when you and your colleagues really put this condition on the map, could you have ever imagined the response?
I think I could have, because we saw how good these people were, and it was pretty easy to see that there were uses for these people by law enforcement and, other security sort of operations. So I'm a little disappointed that U.S. departments haven't picked up and done the same sort of thing that they've done in London. Because they've had great success in London. Right.
There's a great New Yorker article that they put out that really went into the day-to-day experience of a super recognizer on the workforce, and talks about just how much better humans are at recognizing faces than computers.
Yes. There's no comparison at this point. Who knows what it's going to be like 10, 15 years from now. But right now, these super recognizers are far better than computer systems are. Mm-hmm.
Now, knowing how complex facial recognition is, do you think that artificial intelligence will be able to ever approximate, naturalistic facial recognition?
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, I would expect they will be able to. I don't have any feel for how soon that's going to be. Mm-hmm. But, I don't see why they couldn't, replicate the same computational processes that are going on in our brains in a computer.
Until then, we should start employing more super recognizers in the U.S. and Canada then.
Absolutely. And they should bring me in to help them identify them.
I'll help start the task force.
Yeah, my rates are very reasonable.
Well, thank you so much for talking with us today and sharing your expertise in all things facial.
Thank you.
If you guys are interested in learning more about Dr. Brad Duchaine's research, you can navigate to faceblind.org. And if you didn't catch that, you can find the link to that and more about Dr. Duchaine on our website, scienceforthepeople.ca. We'll be right back after this.
Science for the People is a weekly radio show and podcast that explores everyday life from a scientific perspective. We are a member of the Skeptic Network, a collection of blogs, podcasts, and video content focusing on science and critical thinking. To find out where Science for the People airs near you, or to listen to past episodes, check out our website at scienceforthepeople.ca. You'll also find links to support us at Patreon, to connect with us on Facebook and Twitter, and to subscribe to the podcast in iTunes. And now, back to the show.
Welcome back to Science for the People. I'm Jessie Yaros. Our next guest is Dr. Matteo Martini, a psychologist and lecturer at the University of East London. His current research is on pain modulation in virtual environments, but in the past, a few years ago, he published a paper with colleagues entitled, "Is That Me or My Twin? Lack of Self-Face Recognition Advantage in Identical Twins." Even though this study was published in 2015, it's been receiving some belated attention since it was awarded the 2017 Ig Nobel Prize in Cognition. And for those of you who are unaware, the Ig Nobels honor achievements that, as they say, first make people laugh and then make them think, which seems an appropriate characterization of this study. Dr. Martini, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Jessica. Hello.
So tell us, what was this study all about?
Well, the study is basically about we investigated the self-recognition in monozygotic twins.
Identical twins, correct?
Yeah, identical twins, exactly, yeah. So basically what we did here is to recruit couples of monozygotic twins as well as subjects that were really connected to them, like cousins, really close friends, other siblings, to work as a control, okay? What we did is we took photos of them, of their faces, on one day, and on another day we presented their faces to the monozygotic twins and to the control subject. We presented them with these three faces, so their face, the co-twin's face, and the control subject's face. These visual stimuli were presented in a very fast way, so we're talking about milliseconds here. And their task was really simple, was basically to identify as quick as possible the identity of the person, of the face that was presented each time, by pressing one key on a keyboard, basically.
So what would a normal control, how would they perform on this? Someone who really had a very unique face and isn't going to confuse it with anyone else's face.
Yeah, the role of the controls was that basically we needed to check whether, for instance, familiarity accounted for a better face recognition. And also we took into account the emotional meaning of the faces. So, for instance, a stranger's face is not that emotionally meaningful to you compared to your brother's face or your cousin's face or your best friend's face.
Okay, so the idea is that if I'm one of a twin, I'm going to see my face, my twin's face, and a close friend's face. So the close friend is someone that I'm also very familiar and close with, just like my twin.
Yes. So you're seeing as if you are a twin, one of the two twins, you're seeing your face, your co-twin's face, and another face that has you're very familiar with, and also that has a very very big emotional value for you.
Okay. So what were your major findings in this research?
Okay, so first of all, we have to say why we did this research. And we did this research because there are a lot of studies out there in the scientific literature about face recognition. There are really many studies on this topic. But we found out that there were no studies trying to address whether the face recognition, self-face recognition, was somewhat impaired in identical twins. And why we hypothesize that? Well, because as you know, identical twins share many physical features between themselves. So the resemblance there is really high, and we know that resemblance can be a factor that modulates face recognition. And actually, what we found in our study is that the monozygotic twins, these identical twins, lacked this so-called self-face advantage, which is reported vastly in the scientific literature. That basically means that you're better in recognizing your own face compared to other faces, even very familiar faces. All right, so you're faster. Okay. But this doesn't happen within the twin couples. So this was our major finding. So identical twins seems to lack this self-face advantage. So we found no differences in terms of performance when the twins' faces were recognizing their own faces. While, for instance, the control subjects I was telling you about were much better in recognizing their own faces as compared to the twins' faces. So you might think, all right, but this is just because the control subject has to identify his or her face from two very similar other faces, right? So it could be, this could be just at the perceptual level, could be due just to a difference in the physical features of the stimuli that were presented, right? But we found with a further analysis that twins were still better than the control subject in identifying, on average, their faces. What they were not good at, or what they showed anyway, is that they still lacked this self-face advantage.
So it's almost like they were better at recognizing their faces as a unit.
Exactly, yes.
Which brings up...
And actually, sorry, yeah, and actually it has been suggested in the literature, and we also know from our own experience that twin couples have a very strong identity as a couple more than as an individual.
Right. So this gets into the question of the representation of self. And you alluded earlier to some of the prior research on twins and in self-face recognition, but there's no self-face recognition advantage in twins. So could you describe a little bit more of what the self-face recognition advantage is in the first place?
Yeah, so the self-face advantage is basically indexed in scientific literature as a faster response in recognizing your own face compared to when you're presented with other faces. We're talking of other very familiar faces. Okay, so we're not talking of a difference between your face and somebody that you barely know, because that would be too obvious that you're better at recognizing your own face. We're talking of a difference here between the recognition on your own face compared to the recognition of another very familiar face. So it's not just the time of exposure that you've had with a certain face there, but your own face is also very important for the definition of your bodily self, right? So actually the face is probably the most important feature of the bodily self, that characterizes the bodily self. So it also underlies the concept of more general identity. Mm-hmm. And this in the identical twin couple is a bit blurrier, let's say. So the boundaries between me and you in this couple are a bit like overlapping, let's say, if we want.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's almost as if the representation of self is stronger in non-twins, whereas it's, like you said, overlapping when you have a twin that you're both very close with and look very similar to.
Well, at least when I don't want to, we cannot go too far, with the these findings in terms of interpretations and also conclusions and implications. But what we can say here is that yes, at least at the perceptual level, identical twins may be maybe a little bit in trouble, let's say, compared to let's say normal siblings when they have to identify themselves. And actually, anecdotally, we know, for instance, one of the co-authors, her mother, is an identical twin, and she used to tell her daughter that when she was young, she was used to mistake herself for her sister by looking at the picture of them. So.
Wow.
Yeah, and this is not the only case. A lot of identical twins report this. So, especially when they're younger, they tend to mistake themselves. From a social perspective, we might say that not only because they share their 100% of their genes, and so they also at a phenotypical level they share the physical features, so they are really resembling one another. But also, as I was saying, at the social level, these confusion sometimes is boosted by the fact that parents and relatives tend to treat them as a couple, to, for instance, provide them with the identical clothes, and to treat them as they were interchangeable. I don't know if I'm explaining myself here.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, to continue with this idea of how, I guess, social context can modulate that self-recognition, in the study, you actually looked at how twins rated themselves, how similarly they thought they looked to one another, and how that connected to their performance. Could you unpack that for us?
Yeah, sure. So, on one hand, we found this lack of self-face advantage, but on the other hand, we also had other measurements. So, for instance, we asked them how much they perceived that they were similar with their co-twin. And also, we provided them with an attachment style questionnaire. And so what we found is that they tend to mistake themselves more if they perceive themselves more similar to their co-twin. This is something subjective. We're not talking of a similarity that is an objective level of similarity, all right? We're talking of a perceived similarity. So the more I perceive myself similar, more resembling to my co-twin, the more mistakes I will do when I'm about to recognize and tell myself apart from my co-twin face. Okay?
So it's possible that a co-twin or that separate twins could perform differently based on their relative subjective experiences of similarity to their corresponding twin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It seems that the level of similarity, the level of perceived similarity, modulates the self-face recognition. So again, the more I perceive myself to be similar to my co-twin, and the more likely I will be, I will make mistakes. But also, what we found, and interestingly, is that the lack of self-face advantage was also modulated by a component of this attachment style scale that I told you we administered them. So what we found is that if their attachment style was more insecure, they tended to basically do more mistakes, to do more errors when it came to do the recognition task. And we interpreted that as in this way. So the co-twins that were more attached, more dependent on such an emotionally relevant figure as it was their co-twin, they were more prone to identify, to see their co-twin instead of themselves, all right? While on the opposite, the co-twins that were more independent tended to see more often themselves instead of their co-twin.
Wow. So again, this is more of how just personality and opinions and subjective matters can influence actual visual recognition.
Yes, there were hints from the scientific literature that some personality traits could modulate face recognition in general. For instance, we know that extroverts, not surprisingly, tend to recognize more faces compared to introverts. And also that in some schizophrenic patients, so in some patients with schizophrenia, face recognition might be impaired. So we know that personality traits can modulate face recognition.
This is really interesting because when we talk about face recognition, I think we often just feel like, it's all we see visual stimuli in the world, and that travels up through our brain until it becomes some sort of final picture. And that any differences between people would maybe be dependent on something along that way, but not any sort of emotional experience or opinions. So it's really interesting that personality and attention style can really change your perceptual ability to recognize faces.
Yes, actually it is, Jessica. But we know from neuroimaging studies that related to this, that, for instance, seeing your partner's face activates more brain areas than seeing your own face does. All right, and also the neural networks underpinning the processing of emotions are activated depending on the face that you're looking at. So face recognition entails both at the neural level and also at the psychological level, many different areas that come together to shape this apparently only perceptual phenomenon.
That's fascinating. So I have a question then that I've been wondering about, which is if we seem to have really good, in general, self-face recognition, at least if we're not a member of, a twin unit. And even twin units do, as you said, just not, they do, you said, have better face recognition than of their unit even relative to other faces of their family members or close friends. So it seems that our face recognition, though, is very tied to this intimate knowledge of what our faces look like, which now we know because of photography and mirrors, the ever presence of our faces when we wake up in the morning and we look in the mirror. And so I went to look into when mirrors were invented. It was, I guess, in the late 1300s, early 1400s is at least when they started to come onto the world stage. And even then, only the rich people could get them. So how do you think just face recognition or perception of self and identity, do you have any opinions on how that might have changed when we actually started to understand what we looked like?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I don't know, probably mirrors were invented even before that. We know, for instance, that glasses were present in the Roman era already. So I imagine that they could somehow, I'm not sure about mirrors, but for sure glasses were already there during Roman times. So I guess that they were kind of used to see some sort of reflection of their own faces. But before that, yes, your question is actually very interesting. And I don't know, we should run a study, that we would need to go back in time, or probably just address this question by study face recognition in the few groups of people that are still isolated and are living in tribes in the Amazon forest, for instance, that do not use mirrors or other means to see the reflection of themselves.
Well, you certainly are still a scientist, ever the scientist. It's just interesting that you, are able to come up with an experiment to try to test this. It's just a very scientific way to approach it.
Yeah, the idea was yours then.
Well, just to wrap up, you, like we mentioned earlier, you were awarded you and your group were awarded the Ig Nobel Prize for this paper just now in 2017. Did you know what the Ig Nobels were? Did you have any idea it was coming? Did you know you'd been nominated?
All right, yeah. So first of all, we were really happy, and we didn't believe when we got this email from one of the former winners of this award, and we thought it was a joke. I probably heard about it in the past, but at that moment I wasn't, let's say, so familiar with it, while my co-authors all knew this award and were really, really happy from the very first moment. And then yes, we got in contact with the organizer of this award, and ended up presenting, although very shortly, our study in front of 1,000 people in a theater in Harvard this September. It was really emotionally, I'd say, challenging.
Well, it's really fascinating stuff, and I want to thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your research.
Thank you, Jessica.
If you guys are interested in learning more about Matteo Martini's research, you can navigate to the show notes on our website at scienceforthepeople.ca.
Hello, this is Rochelle Saunders. Just before we sign off today, since it's the holiday season and a time of year when many of us will sit down and make decisions about what charities to give to and what organizations to support in 2018, I wanted to give a couple of shout-outs. Before I talk about some well-deserving science and evidence-based charities, I want to also shout out to all the science news organizations out there who work hard to keep all us nerds up to date on the latest and greatest science news. It takes great journalists, editors, and fact-checkers a lot of time to create the content on places like Scientific American, Discovery, Science News, Wired, and NPR, among others, that we mostly enjoy for free. They are often our teachers, helping us understand more quickly what may have taken them days to wrap their heads around. The work these people at science news organizations do often inspires episodes on this and other podcasts. Without their upfront work, we here wouldn't be able to do what we do. So if you spend a lot of time perusing any one of these sites or other great science news platforms, consider finding some space in your 2018 budget to support one of them financially as well. Sign up for a subscription. In a lot of cases, you'll get extra content, which is great. But mostly a subscription does for them the same thing our Patreons and PayPal supporters do for us. It helps keep the lights on. So this year, consider supporting a science news site. There are so many, and it's impossible for most of us to subscribe to them all. But we can all pick one. Our favorite, one at random, that one that seems to be struggling, and support them. In addition to the fine people working the science news beat, we'd also like to offer an assortment of science-related charities that will happily take your money. While we haven't exhaustively researched these organizations, we think they deserve a mention for their fine work, but we also recommend you check them out before donating. You'll be able to find the full list with links to their websites in our show notes at scienceforthepeople.ca. The Union of Concerned Scientists is an alliance of over 400,000 citizens and scientists who believe facts, not ideology, should drive policy decisions. They put rigorous, independent science to work to solve our planet's most pressing problems, and combine technical analysis with advocacy to create innovative, practical solutions for a healthy, safe, and sustainable future. They are on the front lines trying to prevent major cuts to governmental departments focusing on public and environmental health and could use your support. There's also Evidence for Democracy, which advocates for the transparent use of science and evidence in public policy and government decision-making in Canada. It's easy for Canadian science news to get lost in the noise, especially these days with Canadian news media organizations folding left and right. And Evidence for Democracy is a great way to keep abreast of what's going on north of the 49th. In the UK, there's Sense About Science, which works in partnership with scientific bodies, research publishers, policymakers, the public, and the media to change public discussions about science. Their award-winning public campaigns share the tools of scientific thinking and scrutiny, and their International Voice of Young Science network engages hundreds of early career researchers in public debates about research and evidence. If you'd like to help promote science awareness and understanding, you can give to the American Association for the Advancement of Science. The AAAS is an international non-profit organization dedicated to advancing science around the world. They work to foster education and increase public engagement in science and technology for everyone, and to strengthen and diversify the science and technology workforce. Helping to encourage interest and expand opportunities for women in science is an issue that's close to our show's collective heart. In the U.S., the Association for Women in Science and the Anita Borg Institute for Women in Technology promote and encourage women and girls in science, engineering, and technology. Lots of fantastic charities are out there bringing the wonder of science to children. In Canada, we have Let's Talk Science, an award-winning national organization. They deliver science learning programs and services that turn children and youth onto science and keep them engaged in lifelong learning. Engineers Without Borders is an international coalition of dozens of national member groups that make use of their diverse technical expertise to solve critical problems affecting the health of our planet. And of course, there's also Doctors Without Borders, an international humanitarian organization providing independent, impartial assistance around the world to victims of natural disasters or armed conflict. They provide care on the basis of need and advocate for improved medical treatments and protocols. If we miss your favorite science charity, do post a link and description in the comments on this episode. Thanks for listening, and thanks for supporting science and science news in whatever way you can. Science for the People is produced by Rochelle Saunders and edited by Ryan Bromsgrove. Helen Quivalon is our publishing liaison. We get research help from Josh Witten and consulting support from Desiree Schell. Our frequently seen guest hosts are Marion Kilgour, Anika Hazra, and Jessica Yaros. Our theme song is called Binary Consequence, and it was written and recorded by Fractal Pattern. Science for the People is entirely listener-supported. You can find us on Patreon, where you can support us with monthly donations in any amount, or you can send us a one-time donation in any amount via the donate page of our website. Science for the People is created in partnership with the Skepchick Network, a collection of blogs, podcasts, and video content focusing on the intersection of science, popular culture, politics, and social justice. You can find out more about Skepchick at skepchick.org. The show is hosted by science news writer Bethany Brookshire and me, Rochelle Saunders.